Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making it out today. Today's micro learnings is on permission to be human. How do you meet yourself where you are to ignite well being with Mary Beth Highland? Simply put, what we're going to talk today about is like, how do we reduce stress and find happiness by really understanding our core values and our purpose and living an authentic life? During these past years, many of us, including myself, have been really questioning how we live our daily lives. And we've really been forced to identify what's important to us, what are our core values, and really asking ourselves, are we truly living our core values? Whether it's your career choices, your relationships with your significant others, friendships, self care. The reason why core values are important is that they define who we are. When we truly understand and can articulate our core values, they become our North Star. Our values highlights our unique and individual essence, our purpose. Our values, when they're done right, should be a personal code of conduct that informs all parts of our lives, how we spend our time, the mate we choose, the career path we take, even the foods we eat. So when we're congruent with our values, we find happiness and contentment. When we are incongruent, we spiral into negative behavior, staying in negative relationships, staying in jobs that make us miserable, not taking care of our health and our well being. When we are aligned with our values, this is when we find fulfillment. But first, we need to be able to crystallize our core values. Truth be told, I didn't think much about core values in the past. Prior to that, I would always run away whenever they did like a values exercise at conferences or retreats. I thought it was a little hokey. However, this changed this past year when I got laid off from Fortune magazine and I went into a spiral and a depression. And I really started to examine what are the things that are really important to me? What do I value? Because I realized I didn't really know. So I've been thinking a lot about my core values because I hit rock bottom. And I realized that I wasn't happy with my life because I was living everyone else's life but my own. So I started on this journey to really figure out what was important to me, which led me down to discovering my core values. And so my four core values, and for those who read my LinkedIn post, you probably already know them. My four core values are my family and my friends who are my chosen family, my faith, helping others, and freedom. These are the four things that I value most in my life. They're my North Star. However, earlier this year, I really did a reflection and I realized that I wasn't really living my core value. So even though family is the number one thing that's most important to me, every job I took in the past was based on pay. Was I on the executive team? What was the title? What was the company? Nothing had to do with my core values, right? I was working these jobs where my last job, I had a 3 hour commute. I would get home 10 o'clock at night every night from Monday to Friday and really only see my daughter on the weekends. So if my number one value is family, but I never saw my daughter, my husband, you see how there's a disconnect, right? And I think most of us live this life where we find the job of our dream or that high paying job. And then we try to fit everything around it, our family, our health. Maybe I'll fit in exercise. Maybe I'll do something that brings me real joy and fun, but it's after the fact, right? And so it's this huge process of really focusing on my core values. And when I started Community of Seven this past year, it was really based on my values. I really wanted to help people. And I asked myself this crazy question: can I get paid to help people? And so it's one of those things where, because I asked that question, how can I live my life based on my value? Things started to open up. Same thing with my family, like making all of these conscious decisions. And so I'm so excited for this micro learning, permission to be human, because we're going to be talking a lot about values, purpose, and why it's so important for our well-being. I'm excited to introduce Mary Beth, the founder and chief visionary officer of Spark Vision. Mary Beth knows that extraordinary success is rooted in the vision, values, and culture crafted by purpose-driven leaders and their tribes. She has over 12 years of experience built on knowledge from a BA in social work and an MS in nonprofit management. She's known for her ability to create movements across generations. She does this with the understanding that we all have a deep desire to know and return to our most authentic selves at work, home, and within. As a certified mediator, mindfulness instructor, and values expert, she engages audiences and teams all over the world with her authentic style of facilitation, coaching, and empowerment. Her recent awards include Circle of Excellence, Innovator of the Year, Top 100 Women, Civic Engagement Leader, and Leading Women. Her personal life's mission is to create spaces where voices are heard, stories are released, and purpose is ignited. Welcome, Mary Beth. So excited to have you here. Loving your book. If you guys have a chance, Permission to Be Human, it's a great book. You can find it on LinkedIn. I'll add the Amazon where you can purchase it. So in your book, Permission to Be Human, you talk a lot about values and how businesses can create a values-driven culture. Can you explain a little bit about what values are and why they are so important to individuals and companies as well?
Yes, but before I dive into that, I just want to say thank you. This, honestly, the combination of connecting with members of your community leading up to this experience, watching people raising their hands and seeing how much this already resonates with this community, and then hearing your personal story is just a gift to my heart, because I know that more people are waking up to realizing I can't keep going this way, but maybe don't know what is the tool or resource that they could use in order to find a new path. And so I just want to take a moment to really deeply thank you for not only inviting me to be a part of this wonderful experience, but also creating an incredibly dynamic community of people who share those values and want to be a part of making that experience in their own lives. So congratulations to you. You're clearly doing really important work here and spreading amazing energy throughout the whole world in what you're posting and how you're engaging people and actually embodying that too. So values are our intrinsic motivators. So the pieces that live inside of us that when they're activated, we feel totally energized. Where lots of times you can go into experience and immediately that was not the right place for me because my energy is really drained. Or you could go into experience perhaps like this one and feel so filled up with energy. What we often don't make the connection to is in those moments of either disconnect or full connection, it is a reflection of whether or not our values are activated in those moments. So we as human beings are walking, talking, living, breathing sets of values. So are our companies. But we often don't have the language or the understanding of where to pause and see where are my values being activated and aligned in this culture, in this space, in this relationship within myself, and where are they disconnected or maybe even violated to a point where you can't authentically show up in alignment with that value and feel safe in the process of doing that in whatever space that you're in. And so values are this big, lofty idea, but they actually are really connected to our life experiences, understanding the lens in which we view the world. So you mentioned that you had the value of freedom, is that right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So for example, your definition of freedom is likely different than my definition of freedom. However, that's also one of my core values. So one of the most powerful ways to start this process of understanding, if you were somebody who wrote in the chat for, the first question you can start asking yourself is, how do I define that? How do I, as my unique individual self, define that? And then from there, moving into, okay, where did this first show up in my life? How can I start to honor, looking backwards, the milestone moments that created this value in me for better or worse? So using the example of freedom, a big part of what I experienced growing up was a lot of shame and guilt and manipulation around money. Money was a really negative thing, and it was used in a way that was really painful. And so for me, freedom and wealth did not correlate because my life experience was that of pain associated to that. But as I grew older and could look back, I could say, oh, wow, that's because that's how my dad saw that value. That's how he defined it. That's how he was nurturing this in his life, and therefore I was in the aftermath of that experience. And as an adult, I could say, you know what? Wealth is directly correlated to freedom, and I don't have to feel shame about that. That's actually something I can have ownership on, feel proud of, and say, now I'm going to step forward into that, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It doesn't matter what my history says in that.
Rewinding a little bit, you mentioned that your past experiences influence your values. And I know in your book, other interviews I've seen that you've been in, you talk about both good and bad experiences impacting our values. Can you dig a little bit deeper? Like, how do bad experiences shape our values?
Yeah, so the example I just gave, right, of wealth is negative because it was used as a tool for manipulation. That is the shape and the lens in which I took of what it meant to have that as a value. But that was because I was conditioned that way over time to believe that, not because that's actually true in the big picture of the world and life. Whereas positively, when you think about the values of wealth and freedom, my mother was the total opposite end of the spectrum of my dad. In fact, I was talking to her a couple years ago because I was really putting a lot of energy in healing my relationship with money and shame around those kinds of things. And she said, I was like, you never seem to be worried, right? It never seemed to be something that impacted you. And you always seem so free in expressing yourself and doing what you wanted and these kinds of things. And she's, yeah, I didn't grow up that way. So I was never afraid. So it wasn't a part of the way that I believed we engage with wealth or we engage with freedom. And it was such a powerful conversation, and one I would actually encourage any of the listeners here, particularly over the upcoming holidays, to ask your family members, right? Or the people you grew up with, how do you define that? And how was that instilled in you? Because they come from either someone embodying it for good, right? Wow, I want to be more like that. And what a great example of the way I want to show up in life. Or they are created through the low point or the negative side of, I really don't ever want to be like that. I never want to repeat that pattern in my own life, even though I might, because I haven't done the work yet to figure out how to break it.
Yeah. And for those who struggle with trying to figure out what their values are, what are some of the tangible, like either exercises, or I do this with my core community and I simply ask them, what are the things that are most important to you? And that kind of starts that conversation, what your values are. What are some of the things that you do with your clients or with the companies that you work with to really hone down what people's values are? And I guess there's two components to that as well, right? Because there's your personal values, but then how do you do that for a company?
Happy to take both of those, and let's start with the individual side of things. So if you're just doing this as an individual who's interested in exploring this separate from a company or anything else, I encourage you to meet yourself where you are and what's going to make the most sense. So some people, they would prefer to look at a list of values and then rank them, right? And say, okay, this describes me versus this drives me, this doesn't resonate with me, I wish this did. So you could start to categorize these by core values, and this drives me, this resonates with me, as something that would be just a value versus a core value. And then if you move down, you would go into aspirational and things that just don't resonate with you, so you're not your values. And so actually in the book, I have a whole section on how to do this yourself and make the columns and create a values profile for yourself, and being able to have a starting point of, okay, now I can understand, here are the top 10, but now what, right? Now what do I do with these? And so if you're the kind of person who feels like it would be helpful to have a list to start from, I'd encourage you to do that. On my website, sparkvisionnow.com, we have a whole list of those. As Mom mentioned, it's also in the book. There's tons of lists of core values that could be a starting point. However, if you're the kind of person who would rather have an experiential moment in this opportunity, I would encourage you to think about the highs and lows, and you can determine what range of time you want that to be. Maybe you want that to be just this season of your life right now versus your entire life. But really mapping out those milestone moments, those experiences of, whoa, when I had this experience, I felt like I was so alive, I was so on fire, right? Or this experience left me feeling so drained, it made me feel like I didn't know where my place was in this world, whatever it may be, and then everything in between. And from there, you can reverse engineer your values into it. Right? So for example, an experience like this one is something that makes me feel energized. It makes me come alive. It makes me feel a sense of purpose. And so I could put community of 7 down as a bullet on my things that fill me up side. And then I could say, okay, so what was it about this experience that made me feel that way? For me, I felt a sense of belonging immediately. Like I said that when you were just doing the introductions, I felt a sense of belonging in this community. And prior, just online, I felt a sense of belonging. Connection, right? Having the opportunity to truly connect with other souls and individuals who care about the same things. I would also say reflection, so having an opportunity to reflect on the journey, perhaps even growth, right? That not only for me to grow and being able to share, but to ignite growth in others. So it's amazing what we can do when we start reverse engineering. It's amazing what happens when we can get an idea of something that is, I really care about that, or I value that. And then you can figure out, so what values live within that experience? Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And
okay.
It made me reflect on it. And what I like too is that what you said, that your values are changed based on your life experience. And I recently talked about when I was younger, my core values was basically make money because I grew up poor. And so when you struggle to just have food on your table, when I was in my 20s, all I wanted to do was I wanted to be a millionaire before I was 30. And that was my only goal. And what I realized was later on when I was like reflecting back on things, it wasn't the money, because once I made a certain amount of money and was able to financially support my mother, it was really that I wanted security. And what I really wanted was security of not being poor and not knowing how I would pay rent or all this other stuff. And it was family, because I wanted to financially support my mother who had been working till she was 60 or 70. Really, it's about introspection and pausing and really like, why are things important to you? It's not that you want money. It's that you want to support your family. Because when you understand the why, when you understand that why, it changes everything. Because it changes how you see the world. It changes your motivation, and it gives you the real passion in terms of, because just you telling me, oh, I'm going to be able to make a lot of money doing this doesn't make me passionate, but I can help someone or I can help my family. That is the motivator that really drives you. And when you're able to figure out what that is, a lot of it's the surface level. And then when you get deeper, that's when you can really make impact. So exactly. Kind of digging in deeper to this kind of values. We've identified our values. Now, what's the next step? Like, how can we help this reduce stress, anxiety? How can we make better choices based on understanding our values?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because values-based mindfulness is a side of mindfulness that I've been practicing for about the last 10 years, and it has dramatically changed my life. And the idea of that is, most people are familiar with mindfulness, right? Being in the present moment, being curious about this present moment, but not necessarily the values aspect of it. So being able to, like I just said, articulate, why does it feel good for me to be here right now? I know, because I can reverse engineer my values into it. But what we often don't realize, that our values can be a tool for stress relief, is that we always have our values with us. They're always here. Just like you in mindfulness, you might use your breath as a tool. You always have your breath, right? As long as you're living, your breath is always going to be with you. Same with your values. They always exist. So you can choose to activate them in a way that's going to serve you, particularly in stressful times. So I'll give you an example. Last month was World Values Day, and I was so excited. I got invited by the creators of it in the UK, and it was my first time being associated to a global values event. So it was like, oh, this is so cool that this is a conversation happening. And we had about 150 people registered for the experience. Within an hour and a half before the event started, some kind of construction was happening in my neighborhood, and the internet went out completely. Like, it was gone. And I immediately, like, what am I gonna do? So I was able to regroup, and thankfully my mother's home is not too far from mine, and I could use her space to set up. But before I went in and started that experience, my number one driving core value is unity with nature. It's what gets me centered and gets me grounded. And I knew that if I were to have just gone straight into facilitating that, I still would have had lingering stress and anxiety in me, because it was stressful, to be totally honest. It was creating some anxiety of, oh my gosh, are we gonna disappoint all these people because we can't get this together and all this? And so I went out to her garden. I made a point to just stand in the sunshine, to connect with the plants that were around me, to breathe in the fresh air, and just take 1 minute to really feel that connection to that value, which I define as gaining wisdom from and connection to nature. And so being able to do that, I immediately shifted and was like, okay, everything's fine. Because I knew how to harness that immediately in a way that was going to serve me in releasing stress and pulling in a sense of alignment and well-being. And so there's lots of ways that we can do this. For example, if somebody has a core value of curiosity, a lot of times when we're feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, it's like we are just getting straight to frustration, and we forget that curiosity is a value we can pull and call on. So instead of jumping to conclusions, how can I get really curious about this? How can I learn about myself in this process? How can I ask more questions about the people or the person that's a part of this experience, so that I'm not making assumptions, but I can really use that value of something that really matters to me, being curious, and a way to take care of my well-being and show other people that's possible for them too.
I love that. This kind of reminds me too. So what I get from that is that values inform all of the decisions that we make. And when we come into any situation, being able to harness those values and align ourselves in a lot of ways. And it reminds me, one of the things I always tell people is that when you're really aligned with your core values, making decision becomes a lot easier. And in the past, I had like anxiety because I couldn't make decisions, because what if it's a wrong decision? Should I take that job? What if it doesn't work out? Or what if I quit? And I would have so many questions. And I've noticed that since I've gotten aligned with my core values, my decisions come so naturally, where it's no, that does not align with freedom. I'm not going to take that opportunity because it's just going to take too much of my time. And it reminds me of one of my core members, and she told this story about, she's been a C-suite executive for most of her career, but she had not been employed for a long period of time. And an opportunity came that was like to be a CMO of a tobacco industry. She would have had multi-million-dollar budget. She would have had teams in the thousands. It was a high profile job. And she said no. And I was like, you said no? You haven't been working for almost 2 years. And she was like, it doesn't align with my value of health. And I had to say no. This would have changed her life financially, but it didn't align with her values. So the answer was no. And I think that's probably a difficult part, is living your values can sometimes mean taking the rougher road or a different path, right?
At least in the beginning, it feels that way. So one of the things I love that actually walks you through the whole process is something that I call values filters, and you can learn how to do that in the book. But essentially what it is, you take your core values and you create questions that give you a yes or a no answer. I recommend doing 10, making sure that your values are all represented in the questions. You ask yourself these 10 questions that are related to your values, and if at least 8 of them aren't a yes, then it's a no. Then there's no question about it. And it's funny, I'm actually going through this experience right now. I have been taking the values work to a whole new level in my own life because of doing it right with everybody else and wanting to embody the work myself as the way to teach from a place of wisdom and embodiment of it. And recently I had two people come to me who wanted to partner. One would have been a really easy $5,000 thing that I would have gotten easy. I could have had blindfolded, hands tied behind my back. They hadn't respected the process, and they were asking me to do something in a very short turnaround time that would have massively hurt my sense of well-being in order for it to be pulled off, because it involved surveys and looking at data and all these other kinds of things. And so it was the first time in a really long time that I was able to say, I would love to work with you on this. However, we need at least 6 weeks notice to do this, because that's the way that we can do this from a place of wellness and well-being and really honoring that value. And I don't know whether or not we'll have the opportunity to do that work in the future, but it was so rewarding because I felt so good in myself knowing that my health and well-being isn't worth that, whatever the amount of money would be, from a sense of this, if it's right, it'll come back to you. And then recently, I just started a partnership with an organization where I am really regretting it. And ironically, I became a part of this partnership because someone who's done the values work with me and I trust really deeply invited me in. And so I really trusted her, and I was like really going off of her, but I didn't put it through my values filter. And as time gets closer and closer to the launch of this partnership, I'm like, I skipped over my own process. We have to be sure that we're in alignment with each other, so there's a sense of respect, there's a sense of enthusiasm, purpose, energy, so that it doesn't get to a point where you're like, oh, why did I do this? And now I regret it, and now I just have to suck it up because I said yes, and what am I gonna do? So in that case, I was able to have a conversation and say, I think we need to push pause and get on the same page in some areas where I'm feeling like our values aren't in alignment. And I'd really like to come to the table and have a bigger conversation. And so that conversation is happening, but it was a really big shift in owning that and being able to say, we actually can hit pause even if it feels like the train is already moving. There always are chances that we can stop. We can jump off if we have to, right? But to be able to educate people in that process too is a gift for them as well, when you can do it from a place of loving kindness, not being accusatory or judgmental, but rather an opening to have a bigger conversation that is going to help everybody in the process.
So the through line that I see in that, and I think it relates to this whole notion of like stress, and I speak to a lot of executives, and the commonality that I see is that there's a lot of people feeling stressed and burned out. And I think that sometimes when there's not an alignment with your values, that burnout, stress, anxiety come. And one of the things I always say is it's either two things. If you're feeling burnout and stress, you're either doing too much of what you don't want to do, or things that aren't aligned with your values, or you're doing too much of things you want to do and they all have a deadline and you can't meet all of them. And one of my favorite quotes is from Oprah: you can have everything you want in the world, but just not all at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's like this notion is, if you're able to really identify your core values, the next part is living it. And I think what you're talking about is actually living it based on your decisions, based on, these are my core values. It doesn't feel comfortable, meaning I'm not aligned with my values. Now I have to speak up. Now I have to push back a little bit, not in an aggressive way, but just saying, this doesn't make me feel whole. This doesn't align with my values. And that happens in personal relationships, but also business relationships. This
Exactly.
business relationship isn't working. We'll either need to work through it or end it. Because I think a lot of times we're taught that people who are kind are pushovers. And one of the things I've always said is, don't mistake my kindness for weakness. I am kind, but I will not be a living doormat. So this notion of this values, but also living it and being able to demand it in all of the relationships that you have. So next question I have for you is, how do we make sure that our values are our own and not other people's, our families, our parents, society? Because I used to be in the music industry for 5-6 years for a while, and I had a successful music business agency. And I realized that my values weren't aligned with it, but for the longest time I was living that life that was not aligned with my values. And I made myself think that it was. How do we find tune it and make sure it's so that it's authentically ours and not someone else's.
Yeah, this is actually one of the specific questions I ask people to reflect on once they have their core values. One of the specific questions that is posed is, are there any of these core values that you wish didn't motivate you? So, for example, I do retreats and all different kinds of experiences for people to really uncover this for themselves. And it doesn't happen quick. It's not like there it is, right? It's a process of uncovering and being kind to yourself. And because it can be very vulnerable to go into that place within yourself and to recognize where the disconnects are and where the alignment is. And so once you get to a point where you could say, here's my values profile and here are my core values, you could say, are there any of these that you wish didn't drive you? It almost immediately starts to trigger that I actually don't care about that. I just always thought I was supposed to because the people around me kept telling me how important that was. And for example, I had a leader in the community. He has a family-owned business. His father is his boss. He just took over the company, multi-generations of them leading this. And he had one of his core values as politeness. I had never seen that before, that somebody was driven by politeness. He shared with the group, I realized that politeness was so deeply instilled in me growing up that I have learned to shut myself down as a way of not hurting anybody else's feelings, because that's how I've equated this value, and I need to change that because that's not serving me. So it's amazing. Oh, I would have never have thought politeness would be a part of something like that, only because that's not from my personal experience. But it's a wonderful thing to realize how similar and different we are in the stories that we're told about what matters and what we internalize and say, yep, lock that in, that really matters. So I have to move forward to, like you were saying in the music industry, I need to do this because it checks all the boxes for success. But when you can pause and say, whose boxes are those and who made them in the first place, you can start to realize, okay, just because I was told that status is the most important thing doesn't mean that I have to hold social recognition as a core value. I don't need to do that to appease other people if it doesn't actually make me feel really good when that's happening.
I love that. I grew up, my family were Vietnamese refugees, and there was a lot of amazing values that were instilled to me by my parents. But I also learned that I needed to go back and edit certain of those values that didn't align with who I was today, or it didn't serve me for the role that I wanted in the future. Because one of the things that my mom would always say is children are to be seen and not heard, that you didn't want to be the squeaky wheel. And in my profession now, I talk a lot and I am the squeaky wheel and I talk about things that make me uncomfortable. And when there's injustice, I speak up. So I think part of us in our journey, and for the folks who are watching now, is look back in your life and how you grew up. What are the beautiful things you can take and nurture? And what are the things that you might want to change, right? And that's part of growth. We're open up to the Q&A right now. Is there anyone that has questions? Will, hey, Will, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. What is the number one barrier you see when working with people to understanding the core values? Because looking through the chat, you can see people saying, I have too many, I can't. I know you go through the exercise to help people, but do you see some common threads, barriers that people, I'm just curious about that.
Absolutely. Great question. And I would say it goes across the board. So I have something called the Journey to Alignment, which is a 6-week program to help people actually live in alignment with their values. And what's I love about it is there's self-assessment you take in the beginning, in the middle, and the end. And people, you probably rarely hear a facilitator say this, I love it when their scores go down in the midpoint because they didn't actually have the self-awareness they thought they had when they started. So I find that one of the greatest barriers is people not really understanding what it means to know, own, and live your values. And so yeah, I'm doing that. I'm already doing that. Or I know how to do that. But they haven't actually taken the time to understand, okay, so tell me, How is that showing up in your habits and routines? How is that showing up in your rituals, in your relationships, at work, all these kinds of things? It's very similar with working with companies who say, oh, we live our values. We're so great at living our values. So my question is, tell me about how it's a part of your hiring process. How is it a part of the onboarding? How is it a part of the one-on-ones, your annual reviews, the way that you decide who's being promoted, who's being let go? All these kinds of things that it's the same thing, just a different pointing the lens in another direction. It's a really nice idea to be living your values, but it's actually a really difficult thing to do when you don't have the self-awareness to understand, oh, the reason this isn't working out is because it's violating my values. And so now I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to set this boundary. I'm going to start again to really decide how I can now step forward into alignment with myself and my values. So I find it really interesting. Brene Brown has done research that shows that only 10% of companies live their values. And when I did an informal poll on LinkedIn, it was like 75% of people said they live the values every day. And all I could think was, I love that's the experience you're having, but I'm curious if you really are, or if these are nice ideas that have spread.
I love that. Okay. The question that David has, he has a hard time narrowing down his core values. What's the optimum number of core values?
So funny. I think that this is such a common question, piggybacking off of Will's question earlier. People do want to know, what's the right amount? How do I do this correctly? And one of the things that I share with people all the time, particularly when they come into values retreats, is there's really no right or wrong, right? There's no right or wrong. It's what's right to you, what feels right to you. Having said that, if you say I have 25 core values, it's gonna be pretty difficult to be aware of 25 core values at all times. And so something I would encourage you to consider is, which of my core values do I want to have as my North Star through this season of life? Whether it's you do it like, oh, I'm going to do it through literally the seasons and reevaluate winter, spring, summer, fall, or if it's the kind of thing that I'm going through a really difficult moment in life. And so, you know what? My core value of success is now going to be redefined as taking care of myself. And you can shift it and morph it into a way that's going to serve you best. But I would say, generally speaking, 3 to 5 are a reasonable number to be aware of at any given moment, knowing that can change depending on what's going on in your life and the values dramatically transform. So one day my husband and I didn't have any kids, and then the next day, unexpectedly, we became foster parents to a young woman who was my little sister and Big Brothers Big Sisters. You better believe my values changed like that. Instantly, everything shifted, and all the things that I was keeping as my North Star totally got rearranged because it wasn't what was right for that season of life. And so I encourage people to recognize that we are, as I said before, living, breathing, walking, talking sets of values, which also means that they evolve and they change. And some will stay through with you your whole life, but others will dramatically shift as it relates to those milestone moments. And particularly, I'd say over the last 2 years of, oh, I really thought that thing mattered to me. But after 2 years of being in deeper reflection and seeing what works and what doesn't, it's not. And so I can release that because nobody is the keeper of my values but me.
I love that. And I think another thing that's important to note is ranking your values, because sometimes your values will clash. So for example, if world travel or adventure is one of your values, but family is a value, and you had an opportunity to travel the world, but you leave your family for 6 months, it really depends on whether travel and adventure is number one, or if your family is number one, whether you say yes or not. So being able to rank your values, I think, is important. So Jessica, do you want to unmute and ask it?
I can ask it, and it comes off what we just talked about, the season of life, right? So my husband died unexpectedly this summer. It's my first holiday season without him, carrying this intense grief. How do I lean on my core values to keep persevering, to keep my boundaries set, and to remain true to who I am and not let other people define that?
For starters, I'm so sorry for your loss, Jessica, and I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing here and sending you my love, and I trust that this community is doing the same. And so there's several things that you may want to do here. One is that you may want to consider, what are the core values that you shared with your husband? What is the overlap of that Venn diagram? For example, I mentioned unity with nature is one of my core values. It's my husband's too. So when we can be out in nature, it's a really big deal because we both feel really great as a result of doing that. And so I would ask you to consider what may be 1 to 3 of the core values that you shared that you can honor by continuing with, activating with intention. The other side of that is that I think that oftentimes in loss, especially when it's a partner, especially when it's unexpected, a lot of people don't know how to talk to you. They don't know how to engage with you, and it can become a really uncomfortable situation for both the person who's grieving and the people around them, because it's like, should I ask? Do I not ask? How do I show up? All these kinds of things. And so you may be in a position where this is a time to say, what's authentic Jessica? What are the pieces of me that I want to truly protect, and know that no matter how anybody else responds, reacts, engages, or doesn't engage with that, it's okay because they're mine and nobody else can take those away from me. So consider what's one of your core values that gives you a sense of grounding, right? What's something in the way I describe unity with nature? What's a part of you that whenever you do it, you feel like, oh, okay. I'm going to be all right. And I know I can continue to activate this in my life.
Thank you. This is really helpful. I appreciate the support, and it gives me something to think about. So I think
Okay.
I'll have to process it for a while.
Okay, great. And Jessica, and I say this to Jessica and the entire group that's here, if anyone has specific questions that they'd like to talk about offline, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and message me. I love that platform for that reason. More than likely, I'll have a resource or a tool that I can point you to, because this is so important. It's so important that we're able to recognize this. I had an experience with a woman I worked with, her values, who she went on this big solo trip and she was so proud of herself. It was this really big deal. And it was a big part of her values work, is she wanted to ignite this inside of herself. And she came back home from the trip, and someone had robbed her, and not only robbed her, but also flooded the house, turned all the faucets on. So it had been flooding for days when she got back. So everything was ruined that she had really cherished. And it was the most beautiful thing to talk to her, because she said to me with tears, what I realized in that moment was that no matter what anybody else could do to me, no matter what anybody else could take from me, they could never take my values. And so I share that in the sense of, through loss, through tragedy, through experiences that are really shaking us, shaking our reality, this is a moment, an opportunity to say, what can no one take from me? And how can I make a point to activate that in my life today?
So we have a question from Brooke too. I'll ask a question. This is a really good question. It seems easier to make choices aligned with your values when you're an entrepreneur, but not as easy when you are an employee. So it's not always possible to set boundaries. Can you speak more on this?
Yes, I'm glad this came up, because you had asked me earlier about how do we do this with companies, and we skipped over that. And so I'm glad I have the opportunity to address it here. I was getting carried away in my other stories earlier. And so this idea of, okay, so it's not my company. How can I be thoughtful about the way I activate my values, or maybe even the values of the organization, in a way that's going to give me a sense of wellness? So the first I would recommend, and this is like the best case scenario, you may not be in this scenario right now, but I'll talk through a couple others, is that you ask about it before you take the job. For example, if one of your core values is creativity, and that's not really apparent in the work that you're going to be doing per se, that you're going to have the opportunity to be creative, I would encourage you in the interview process to say, one of my core values is creativity. These are the ways I've been able to activate it in the past in my work. I'd really love to hear from you. what opportunities would those look like here? How would that look like? Is creativity something that this team embodies? I'd love to know some examples of when you were the most creative and when you weren't, and what the difference was between the two. So sometimes we forget that, particularly in this day, that the employee has power also, right? Both sides are interviewing. Both sides are deciding if it's a good fit. Oftentimes we feel like, oh my gosh, I need this job. And I totally understand financial strains and all those things. And there are times that you need to take something because you have to take something, right? To pay your bills and things like that. But even if you're taking a temporary position of that, it's still an opportunity to have this conversation. So let's say you've already been in the organization for a long time, or maybe who knows, however much time, and you were like, I don't think this is a fit with my values. I would first start by getting really clear on what those values are, just like you would in the interview process. But instead, you could go to your team, your supervisor, whatever it may be, and say, I've been doing a lot of personal reflection and I'm realizing that creativity is one of my core values. And I'd love to talk to you about what possibilities there may be here for me to activate that more. Here are some ideas that I have. What do you think about that? And so you don't have to feel trapped, but either way, however they respond, whether they're like, that's awesome, go for it, we're so excited, or they say, you have the wrong job then, right? You're getting really great information about your next steps either way. Because it is really, we are not meant to just stick around and muscle our way through and suffer for years and years to pay our bills. We really have the opportunity to say, okay, this job can actually be my petri dish of learning what I don't want in my next job and learning how the things that I don't want are connected to my values that aren't being activated. So I often encourage people to be able to take advantage of that awakening moment of, ooh, this isn't going to work for me. Instead of just jumping ship right away, it can be one of the best opportunities to start making those drain and fill lists and reverse engineering your values into them to see where are they active, where are they violated, and how can I make more intentional choices in wherever I'm going next, or how I stay here.
Yeah, I have a quick story. So someone had reached out to me she loved her company, but her manager they were not aligned values wise, and it was pretty much a toxic manager. And she was about to quit the company. Her manager ended up getting laid off, and now she loves her job. Sometimes you like the company culture, but you might just have a toxic boss. And maybe it's even exploring different parts of the department or different parts of the company, or your other option is to leave, because sometimes it's really difficult to change a culture of a company. Mary Beth, final thoughts. What are things that you would want our folks to learn from this talk? And also, how can we help? How can our community help and support you?
Yeah, my final thought would be to just keep meeting yourself where you are, right? That's how we started this conversation. A lot of times it can feel like you're so far behind, or you're on too far ahead on the wrong path. And just be kind and generous to yourself in the process of knowing that every day, every moment is a new chance to have self-awareness and make choices that are going to better align with who you truly are at your core. And that is a reflection of your values. So just keep being kind and generous. We get so frustrated with ourselves, right? We can be so harsh to ourselves in a way we never would with our loved ones. And so please just keep being kind to yourself in that process. And actually, one of the things that really resonated with me in this community was you had shared, I don't know if you could see, you had shared my Permission to Be Human pledge on your social media, on LinkedIn, and got such beautiful responses. And this pledge is really just 6 statements. I promise to honor what makes me perfectly imperfect, to meet myself where I am, not where I want to be, to suspend judgment and ignite compassion, to set healthy boundaries and protect my energy, to prioritize my well-being by embodying my values, and giving myself and others permission to be human. And so come the new year, we are going to be doing a Permission to Be Human pledge challenge, where you look in the mirror every day and you say these things to yourself. You actually recite this and you take the time to notice Which ones are my areas of opportunity? Which ones are my areas to celebrate? I'm going to be having a series of live coaching sessions, all for free, throughout the month of January for folks who want to go deeper in this process. And this really speaks to that idea of self-awareness, self-love, and self-compassion that we can really only give to others when we first give to ourselves. And if anybody is interested in being a part of this challenge, I would love, love, love for you to not only sign up, but to spread the word. Because how much better would our world be if we're giving ourselves and others permission to be human? And I have a link to where to sign up for that I'll put in the chat now. Oh, did you already put it in there?
Oh yes, I put the link to the call it. Yes, thank you for
The
sending that.
the post.
Yes.
Okay. Okay,
And
cool.
so, awesome. So a time is up, but if everyone can actually do me a favor, turn on your videos, unmute yourself, and give Mary Beth a round of applause. Woo-hoo! She deserves a round of applause. Woohoo! Thank you guys. Thank you everyone. Really appreciate you guys coming. So remember your homework. Figure out what your core values are. If you haven't figured out what your core values, make it your mission to find out what your values are. Every day when you make a decision, think, does this align with my core value? And make sure you take the pledge as well, and then follow Mary Beth, and I will see you guys at the next talk. Take care.